What's the dark side to recycling, and how does it fit into the exploitation of the developing world by the developed world? Well, we have an author as our guest today who's written a debut novel that addresses these two questions and lots of other really exciting and, well, maybe exciting's the wrong word, but lots of other questions that directly concern our present and our immediate future. I'm incredibly excited to have him on, and of course I am Angus Stewart, and you're listening to the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast. So our book is Waste Tide, Huāng Cháo by Chen Qiufan, and he's our guest too. This is, of course, episode 2 of 4, at least 4, but probably 4, of the terrific SciFi season. Of course, the first episode of the SciFi season was Hao Jinfang's Holding Beijing. Now we're at the halfway point with Chen Qiufan, so really hope you enjoy it. Before I launch right into the amazing interview I had with him, I'm just going to do the plugs. So the plugs are, of course, first of all, the show's social media platforms on Instagram, Terrific, why am I blanking this? TRCHFIC, and my Instagram, Angus Likes Words. You can use both of them to leave feedback on the show if I missed anything, and I know I've missed things in this interview because there was things I wanted to say that I forgot to say because I was too caught up in chatting to Qiufan. So yeah, there's that. If you want to support the show financially, help me cover the hosting fees, you can do that on Patreon, where you'll get access to bonus content. And also there's Buy Me a Coffee, where you can give a little one-off contribution. So plugs are done. Let us charge on and listen to me having my chat with Chen Qiufan, the author of Waste Tide. So I'm on the show with Chen Qiufan. He's the author of this episode's book, Waste Tide. Or Waste Tide, sorry, not The Waste Tide, just Waste Tide. And he's one of the big names of 21st century sci-fi in China. He also goes by the name Stanley Chen. So if you hear me say Stanley Qiufan, Chen Qiufan, or Stan, it's all the same person. So with that in mind, Stan, how's your day been today?
Yeah, I'm just working as usual on something because I just back Singapore Writers Festival and Hong Kong International Literary Festival. So it's kind of like I caught in something there. Yeah.
A lot of travel. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So speaking of travel, just like the last two people we had on the show, Michelle Dieter and Liu Guangzhao, we met at the Leeds Genre Fiction Symposium, and you were there talking both to the symposium and to a public event afterwards. And I think in both cases, you weren't just talking about your own writing, like some writers might. You also were really, I guess, prioritizing talking about the ideas in your writing. A lot of those are ecological, environmental ideas. And I noticed when I was looking online during my dissertation on Chinese sci-fi, that's something you do a lot, both internationally, so I guess in Chinese media and English language and international media, and like we saw at the event, offline, but also online. So am I right to say that this kind of reaching out is a really important thing for you?
Yes, especially in recent years, I've been traveling a lot, like to different countries, and have this kind of talks and sharing and symposiums with both readers and also academic people. So I think it's very inspiring to hear the real feedback from all these readers and also the researchers. Always give me something new to think about.
Absolutely. You said that you'd been to not Switzerland, sorry, Singapore and Hong Kong. Obviously, we saw you in the UK. Have you been to any other non-English speaking or non-Chinese speaking places?
Yes, last year I've been to Italy and also Frankfurt Book Fair and also some other book fair in Southern America, is in Chile and also Uruguay. And I've been to Sweden and Korea and also Japan for sure. There's a lot of like science fictional convention and symposium all around the world.
Mm. Now I know I'm asking questions that are maybe a little bit besides the point, but is Chinese sci-fi well read or popular in those neighboring countries, Korea and Japan?
I think, especially this year, like the three body problem finally get translated into Japanese and
Mm,
it become phenomenon. And is sold out like in the first day, so they had to print more copies like crazy. So I think yes, right now it becomes something big and very popular
okay.
in Japan and also in Korea. Yeah.
Last question on this tangent. Do you know if the Japanese translation of Three Body is directly from the Chinese or if it's a relay from Ken Liu's English version?
I think they did it both sides. I think because one translator I know, she can read Chinese, and also like I think they're doing it directly from Chinese, and
Mm,
also there's some reference with Ken's edition. So I
right.
think because they change a lot from the Chinese to English, so I think there might be something aligned with the English edition as well.
Okay, that'll pop up again, this topic of changes made to the English version when we're talking about your own book. So with that in mind, and moving on, is there anything else about you or Waste Tide or your other work that you'd like the listeners to know before we keep going?
Um, not so far because I think we'll talk about it later. Yeah.
Okay, you're very right. So here's the first question about Waste Tide, and it's a really
Hmm.
open question.
Yes.
What's it about?
I'll say Vista is about a lot of things in different layers. So basically, it's a near future cyberpunk dystopian. You can put all these labels on it.
Hmm.
So it's about like in near future in China, there's a small island called Silicon Isle. So there's a lot of like electronic waste shipped from the developed countries. So we have a lot of like you can say cyborg or waste people dealing with all this waste and making money and also like doing this kind of operation as an ecosystem. So there'll be some US technology company involved try to upgrade, as they say, upgrading the recycling system to make it more efficient and more clean and more eco-friendly. But somehow there's some local plans who running the business who refuse to do so because they have their own interests inside. So my protagonist actually is one waste girl who was a migrant worker and she got abused or damaged by both the environmental issues and also from the local gangster. So the story basically is about how she was survive and also resurrection from the disaster and finally become some uh, warrior or goddess
Hmm.
like leading her people to fight against the system. So change the whole dynamic in a way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What you said right at the start there about it being a near future novel, I think that's
Hmm.
when I was reading it, that really jumped out at me. It feel a lot of what's discussed in it is stuff that is immediately relevant to what's happening today. And I suppose if you're being strict in that sense, it's not sci-fi. And it struck me as a little bit of a contrast because the first Chinese sci-fi I read was,
Hmm.
and most of the sci-fi I've read, not even the Chinese stuff, is, it's in space, it's far in the future, it's a very big scale. Or
Yes.
even the softer sci-fi, again, Chinese and not just Chinese that I've read, it's maybe not so big and it's not in space, but the technology is a very new and different thing, or we're maybe very far in the future. But Waste Tide is really, it feels like it felt to me anyway, like it was definitely about today, but with some technology that is a bit further forward, some more crazy things, but mostly super duper relevant to the real world, especially as we'll find out a little bit more when I ask you about the setting. But before that, am I right in saying this is your first novel, and before it you've written you've published some short stories? Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us, was it a little bit tricky to change to the novel form, or were there any challenges, or was it anything that was very different?
Yeah, like it's totally different. Like it's just like running a marathon compared with like 100 meters. So I have to say that I don't have a lot of experience before I writing Waist Tie because its length, its structure, and maybe a lot of like characters and maybe storylines is very difficult as a beginner on novel writing. So from a short story writing, because it's like totally different things. So I learned a lot, and I still am like finding a lot of things I try to improve. Like if I looking back in the days I writing this novel, but I think it's very precious experience while I'm doing Wish Tie, because it's the very first time I try to build up this scale of narrative and using this complicated POV. So you can say it's success or it's not that success, but I think to me it's like a very nice experiment, because I try to use a different perspective to bring out different message according to their own background, their own position. So I think I try to build up not black or white world, like everything or everyone is setting in a great zone, so you can see from their perspective and you feel they're all reasonable for them to making those decisions, even you can say it's evil or bad, but in a way that it is all reasonable, it's acceptable. So I think to me writing a novel lens work is it's a wonderful and amazing journey. So it's just took me 1 year to finish it while I was working for Google. So I think this kind of experience you never like took it back for the second trial, because when you writing the second one is totally different thing. So you set up different expectation, you have different experience, and people treat you differently. So I think your first novel for sure is a treasure, for everyone.
So you were saying that you had to it was your first time taking these different perspectives of a variety of different characters and understanding their point of view. So I was going to ask you about this a little later on, but I think we can jump ahead. So I guess, although you said your main protagonist is the waste girl, whose name is Mimi, there's a few other characters who get a lot of, I guess, page time or word count or whatever, where it's their perspective. So the other two I noted down, there's Chen Qiufan, who is he's an overseas Chinese, I guess, a Chinese American, and there's Scott, who is he's the American guy representing the company. And I definitely think your efforts to give us their point of view and their kind of reasons for doing what they do were really good, especially Scott, because I think if this was a third person story, Scott would be spoilers, a pretty bad guy. But the way you showed us where his feelings or his perspective or his position, I did kind of find myself agreeing with some of the things. Like you show us his thoughts and his perspective on things, and he's absolutely not black and white. He often starts with a pretty good understanding, because he's the foreigner in the foreign country. And I think as a foreigner in China goes, he's not too bad. He's quite adept at learning the situation, but it's just because he's representing this dodgy company. That's one reason why he does his bad things. And everything I've said about him, you could say just as much about the other two characters. So yeah.
Yes, to me it's like a triangle on these three characters, and kind of keeping balance on different perspectives. So yeah, you can say like there's maybe not only one protagonist but three. That's to me it's like acceptable. Yeah, because they all like deliver different message from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into the setting in my next question I have for you, but I should also say, although Mimi is the character who's not at all American, she's also a migrant worker, so she's not from the Waste Island town that the story is set in. So alongside these three, you've also included some minor characters who are the local people. So on that topic, talking about the setting, so for every episode I've done, I always try to find a way to talk about what region or area of China the story's set in. So for example, there was the Chili Bean Paste Clan by Yang Ge, Woman Jia, where the setting of Sichuan is pretty important, especially the small town. And I did Empire of Dust, Nonmin Digua by Jiang Zilong, where the setting of it being the north is important, but the particular province not so much. And then some of the other stories, the setting's really not important at all, and I can't talk about it much. But for this book, getting to the point, the setting's really important. So can you tell us why is the setting so important?
Yeah, the setting was in southern part of China, is in Guangdong province. So actually, it is where my hometown is in. So actually, is I using the real location as a blueprint. So just adding some fictional layer on it, because in the book there's like very local culture and food and dialects, and also like traditions in there, because I think it's very relevant. In Guangdong province, where I was born and raised, there's a very strong tradition of this kind of like clans, and people were so strongly connected by their blood and family. So I think it's kind of like community very similar to this kind of like both like futuristic but also very traditional way. So as you can see, there's a lot of like technology being used, but in a very superstitious way. So that's how I experience it since my childhood. So that's the very mixture of this specific area in China, because we are pretty close to the Pacific Ocean. We are at the coast, and we are very open to the Westerners' culture and technology and all this kind of value. But meanwhile, there's very strong ancient righteous belief system, and also this kind of value system within our daily life. So there's huge conflicts, and also there's some harmony existing simultaneously. So that's I think it's very unique and didn't been explored before, because in China the literature history is mostly based on Mandarin, which is a very northern official language. But to me, is like Chinese is very diverse. We can have different dialects. Like here, I using a lot of different dialects, like Hua, like Cantonese, and also Mandarin, and also Japanese and English. So there's a lot of different culture there, and deliver their message from different language. So I
Yeah.
think the location is super important in my book because this is the nuance and the authenticity I try to bring to my readers as a real holistic China, not just a very symbolic and simplified Chinese image here.
Yeah. Um, that's something I think is really worthwhile doing, and I know Ken Leo has said in his view, China is often
Hmm.
misunderstood by Westerners as being this one thing, homogenous, and in his opinion, it's almost the opposite. It's a I think he's called it a collection, a diverse collection of many cultures. So
Yes.
on that point, because he was the translator of this book, and he's got like a little a translator's introduction where he pays special attention to explaining the way he's translated your uses of the different dialects and regional
Hmm.
languages. So what I'm
Yes.
curious about, because I've only read the English version, is when you're
Yes.
using the local language and dialects, what do they look like in Chinese on the page?
Yeah, because we can only use Chinese to express, and especially even you use dialects, you can only put them down in Chinese characters.
Mm,
So I think all we can do is like using some very local expression. Like there's different way of saying one thing in Cantonese and in Chaoshanhua.
mm,
So also we will put some Romanian like alphabet, like help people understand how to pronounce it
yeah.
correctly. Yeah, those, so I think it's very important to me because I try to bring this kind of like diversity to my readers to help them understand there's not only one way to express a food, a fish, or something very daily life. So we try to create this kind of atmospheres.
Mm. So in the English version, when Ken Leo wants to show you how I guess if it's a Chaoshanhua or a local the local dialect is written, he sometimes takes the sounds and puts them in, like you said, in the Roman alphabet. So kind of
Hmm.
like a pinyin, but not for Mandarin, for the local dialect. So what I'm curious about, I forgot if you've said this before at the symposium we were at. Was that using a spelling system that already existed, or did you and Ken come up with a spelling system for that?
Actually, we're using some very already exist. There's some Cantonese dictionary and also Chaoshan dictionary. So we
Right.
just yeah, look it up and use it.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm glad that's a nice, straightforward answer.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So getting back slightly to what you said about the strength of clans and family in this region, I guess in Guangdong, there's a little passage in the book where you that I highlighted because I liked it so much, where the narrator or one of the characters is describing how these local clans on the Waste Island have kind of evolved along with capitalism, and they've kind of
Hmm.
evolved almost into businesses. And I don't really have a
Yes.
question. I just wanted to say to the listeners, that's awesome. It's a really good bit. And there's quite a few sections in the book which are they're little it's the kind of sci-fi thing where it's explaining something, but the way you do that, it's very it's not too long, it's not too short, and the explanations are very detailed and satisfying to read. So just wanted to say I like those. I don't really have a question for you there.
Thank you.
I do have one more question about the story.
Mm.
It's relating to something the last guest, Guan Zhao, said to me. He was telling me that Folding Beijing didn't get a
Yes.
lot, or got a little bit of criticism in China
Hmm.
because he told me readers in the PRC generally
Hmm.
prefer hard sci-fi, so like very sciencey sci-fi to the softer stuff. So two questions. Do you think he's right about that? And second question, how hard or soft do you think Waist Tide is?
Yeah, I think Guangzhou make a point that most of the Chinese sci-fi reader actually got their reading experience from Golden Age sci-fi. So back from the Asimov, Clarke, and Heinlein age.
Yeah.
So pretty much they are shaping their preference and taste from those classic works.
Yeah.
So that comes to the definition of hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, and also like from Xiajia, the porridge sci-fi. So there's some hierarchies there, like hard sci-fi is always on the top, and maybe soft sci-fi is like a little bit below that, but be undervalued. But to me, it looks like the dynamic is changing. Because right now, as we introduce more and more modern or contemporary science fiction to China, like those from Ashra Le Guin, Philip K. Dick, Ted Chiang, Ken Liu, and also from Lavie Tihar and Charlie Jane Anders, so many diverse writers and works. So I think right now for some readers, they start to realize there's not necessarily a, a borderline between hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. There are only good and bad sci-fi.
Yes.
So I
well
think,
said.
yeah. So, for example, Waste Tide, there's a lot of like info dump there. So you could say it's hard because I really look it up in some research and paper. But also there's a lot of soft part, like talking about relationships and emotions, and also there's some poetic moments which is not relevant to science and technology at all. So I think it's like a mixture. I didn't really think about if I'm writing a hard sci-fi or a soft sci-fi at the very beginning. I just try to tell the story I want to tell. So I think that's the message I always try to deliver to my authors and also to the mass audience in China, like how we can open our mindset to accept more diverse science fiction in genre and on themes and on different narratives. Yeah.
I'm really embarrassed that I forgot the word info dump. That was exactly what I was trying to say a minute ago, and instead I was just saying bits where the author is explaining. But yeah, the info dumps are not too long, not too short, very good, like I said before. And for listeners who are curious about what porridge sci-fi might be, if you haven't heard that term before, I'll just say wait until the next episode, and we might be talking a little bit about that. Thank you for your answer, Stan. So I'll go on to asking you some translation-y themed questions, although we've already touched on this. Translation and maybe also some publishing aspect stuff. So first question. So I mentioned the last episode we talked about Folding Beijing. The translator of that story was Ken Liu, and as we've mentioned before, he's the same guy that translated Waste Tide, and he's translated quite a few of your other stories, I believe. So how did you first get in touch with Ken Liu?
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. Back in, I think it's like 10 years ago. So I read the story, The Algorithm for Love, online. So it's the very first story from Ken. I'm pretty into that story, and I searched the name Ken Liu because I didn't know him very well back then. I think he's pretty new in the industry and pretty early career. And I found his website, and there's his contact email there, and I shot him an email that say, hey, I really like your story, and I would love to translate or introduce your work into China market, because I think you are a Chinese American, so I totally believe there's a lot of readers here would love to read your work. I feel there's a lot of connection between your work and Chinese people, so, and culture for sure. So that's how we build up the connection, and we become friends, and we have a lot of like conversations, and afterward, like in maybe 1 or 2 years later, that I send him some story. I hire some translating company to translate for me. It's the Fish of Lijiang. So I asked him to do me a favor to like see if like there's anything we can do to improve. And he told me like we have to redo it from scratch because they don't think the company did a very good job, because they're mostly doing business translation rather than literary translation. But yeah, as you know, it's totally different thing, and it's totally difficult for them to do the job. So I think Ken Liu just take on the job, and he redo it from scratch, and didn't get paid and didn't have any kind of expectation on the market back then. So, and we got published on Clarkesworld and won an award on science fiction and fantasy translation award. The very second year, I guess it was in 2012. So that's how everything start to rolling the stones, I think. So yeah, it's a very interesting story.
If listeners are interested in reading the Fish of Lijiang, that's in Ken Liu's Chinese sci-fi anthology, Invisible Planets, along with I think 2 of your other stories, Year of the Rat,
yes,
and is it The Flower of Shadzui? Is that it?
Yes.
Yep, it's in
exactly.
There. Yep, and what you were saying about Ken Liu being his writing having a connection with Chinese culture. So I know that he's quite careful to stress that he's an American first. He's not to be considered a Chinese writer. But the book of his that I've read, The Paper Menagerie, I think it's a mostly sci-fi collection of stories that he wrote. Some of them hard sci-fi, some of them soft, some of them in the middle, like Waste Tide.
Yes.
And some of them, from what I remember, maybe a few of them aren't really anything particular to his Chinese American identity or Chinese culture. But the stories that do involve that are fantastically done. The way that they kind of reinterpret or reimagine Chinese culture, or the way that they connect with American or Western culture. Some of those are fantastic. There's one where, now what is the big strong guy from Sangguo called?
Yes. Guan Yu.
Guan Yu. There's a story with Guan Yu in the Wild West, which that sounds silly, me describing it, but that's a fantastic story.
Yes.
Yeah, and the one that the book is named after, The Paper Menagerie, I think unless your heart is totally black, that story will make you cry. That's a fantastic story with a very subtle kind of sci-fi inclusion of Chinese or Asian stuff. It's so good. So yeah, again, that's not a question for you, Qiufan. I just wanted to say that. Next question, it's about you and Ken. And I already know the answer to this one. I'm just setting you up. Were you involved much in the translation of Waste Tide?
Yes, actually we did have this kind of like exchange ideas, like, because we have to work together with our editor from Tor. So actually my editor Lindsay Howe, she'll give some comments on the translation, and we'll read and discuss, and I'll revisit my Chinese edition and make some change accordingly, and then Ken will translate it into English again. So it's like a three-party like collaboration. So but also I have my fully trust in Ken's building work. So I just let him do whatever he thinks is correct and appropriate to do. So I think mostly I just respect what his option on sentence level or like on words level. So yeah, so but sometimes he might have some uncertainty, and maybe there's some doubts on the original text. So then we'll discuss, and maybe there's some ambiguous in Chinese writing, as always, because Chinese language is kind of ambiguous. So I might put it in a more accurate way, especially on the timeline, because for the Westerner, maybe there's some certain type of tenses there. But in Chinese, we don't have past tense, we don't have future tense. So everything is just like flowing. Like sporing. So sometimes it just make Westerners feel confused. So we might need to arrange some of the timelines accordingly to make it more clear. And that's basically how we collaborate on Westtide.
I remember when I first told my dad that the Chinese language doesn't have any kind of tenses, he tried to make some deep philosophical point about how your language changes the way you interpret the world. Do you think any of that's true, or do you think it's nonsense?
I think it's true. I think it's really true. So yes, and also I really thinking deep into that. So maybe it will also affect the way we think about the space and time continuum. So, and also the sense of time, I think, in a way. So maybe it would be another good material for writing another fiction.
Sure.
So I think, yeah, and also like how Easterners treating like the relationship between the subjectivity and the objectivity. So it's like very different from the Westerners, I think. It's not that dualism, I would say. It's more connectivity and more embedded into each other. So I think it's very integrated system there.
I think these kind of questions, it's easier to deal with them in fiction because it can be a story, you're not making an argument. But if I just wrote some essay online or on Twitter about all Chinese people are X, all Westerners are Y, well, if I was some figure, I'm going to get in trouble for that, because you got to be...
Yeah, for sure. There'll be a lot of trolls like chasing after you.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, but well, there is that one story that deals with language and time. It's the one that was made into a movie, Arrival, by... Well, Arrival's the movie name. What is the story name? It's a history of something.
The Story of Your Life.
That's the one. Yes, thank you. I'm glad you're less ignorant than I am. Yeah, that's... if listeners haven't seen or read that, that deals with pretty much what we were talking about in an interesting way. I've only seen the film, but it's a good film. Yeah,
it's a good story as well. Tech Chang is a genius, I'll say.
Yeah. A recommendation for the listeners, there's another podcast that talks about a couple of Ted Chiang's stories. It's called Very Bad Wizards. It's mostly a psychology and philosophy podcast, but occasionally they talk about a story or TV show, and they quite like these mind-bending thought experiment stories. So if you that sounds interesting, just do a Google search for Very Bad Wizards. Enough said there. I'd like to ask you some environmental themed questions, Qiufan, because like I said before, when you do your author, what would traditionally be author promo, you take the chance to even move completely away from the story and talk about these issues. So I don't know if we mentioned Guiyu yet. Can you tell us where and what Guiyu is?
Yeah, Guiyu is a small town, like 60 kilometers from my hometown, Shantou. It's on the southeast coast of Guangdong and also China. So, yeah.
And what happens in Guiyu? What's the economy?
So, yeah, back in, I think, from the 90s to, I think very recently, it's the economy there was basically built on the recycling of electronic waste from abroad, mostly shipping in an illegal way. So they hire a lot of migrant workers to disassembling all this kind of motherboard cables and circuits there, and try to attract some materials like metals from them and make some money. So that's how the industry worked there. But it caused a lot of environmental issues, like totally disaster, pollution on air, water, and soil, and also damaging the health to the people, like the lead in the blood, and also very high rate of cancers. So so it was like, when I was writing the book, actually it was just about to transit, because right now, at the very beginning of last year, actually China has banned 24 types of foreign waste, including e-waste. So Guiyu is like one of the upgrading showcase here, because after I think it's 7 or 6, 8 years of construction of the eco park, so right now they build up this kind of park that have a more efficient recycling streamline, and also a better health care and also medical cares for those workers. And also we can see the quality of water and air has been in enormous improve, but while the soil is still takes time longer to recover. So I think the things has been improved a lot, but I think there's also some harm be transferred to other part of the world, for example, to Southeast Asia, to India, to Africa, and also to, I think it's to Southern America. So it's a global issue. It's not just happen in China.
Totally.
So yeah. So I think we need to see the whole picture here.
Yeah. I mean, I in the last episode, I tried to relate some of these issues to my hometown, Dundee, the issues relating to class in folding Beijing, and this stuff about the pollution being exported to less developed economies, that totally applies, because my hometown, Dundee, used to be a factory town. So in the city centre, we have lots of nice old buildings that were built by the money from that, but a lot of them are still stained by the smoke, and some of them have been cleaned, and with the black stuff cleaned off, they look so much better. But of course, that industry, some of it has been replaced with more high-tech stuff, but the bigger picture is, of course, the factories moved east to Eastern Europe or to Asia, and now, like you're saying, these kind of dirtier things in the economy, although they've left Guiyu, which is great for Guiyu, presumably the waste hasn't gone away. The waste has just gone somewhere else. So on that topic, do you think, specifically e-waste, do you think that gets enough attention in the media and discussion compared with other environmental issues? Or would you like to see it talked about more?
Yeah, I think the awareness of e-waste, I think is uprising, because right now, you can see all this kind of electronic devices upgrading and retirement happen every year. So driving by the consumerism and driving by those big tech companies. So as well as the throwaway culture. So people purchasing newer, faster, fancier equipments, but without thinking the consequence. So I think now, there's a lot of protesting against waste from developed countries in Southeast Asia. So I think it's just brought into attention of the people, like because there's a lot of like these gradable materials in the electronic waste, and we need more technology upgrade, and we need more like full life cycle consideration, and also we need the government, the research institute, and also the manufacturers to play roles in this whole industry upgrade. And also we need to have the cautiousness and awareness of the consumers as well, because it's like fundamentally we are who consume this products, we're whom dump this product, and we are whom suffer from it. So I think it's ultimately, and we need to solve it, but we need a broader view to bring in all this like interest related parties to get involved.
On that topic, is there a particular type or group of person or people that you would most like to read Waste Tide and get its messages, like bosses or consumers or people in government? Is there anyone you want the most to take it on board?
Yeah, I really would love to have this kind of bosses from tech companies to read the book. And also, right now, actually, we have some entrepreneurs who doing the recycling business in China reading the book, and also people from Greenpeace, they're also reading the book. And for sure, the younger generation, they're reading the book. But I think the most important thing for now is like those decision makers, the policy makers. They have to see the whole picture and see how important the issue is to be dealt with. So yeah, maybe for some local government, they think the development is the first priority, right? So you can pollute it first and then deal with the mess later. But the history proved that it doesn't work anyway, so we have to think ahead of what's happening. So and
I think what you're saying there about politicians putting development first, that's, although that can happen, I guess that does happen in China. There's the focus on growth and development. We have our own equivalent here in countries where even though the politicians are elected, they'll do that usually with promises based on jobs or economy. It's much harder to get elected, I think, even now, if you're saying you're going to do so and so for the environment, if the other guy you're competing with is promising more money. So like you said, totally a universal thing. And also I think what you were describing about environmental activists, bosses, all these people have an equivalent in your novel. There's an environmental group who are a little bit like Greenpeace. You meet are there entrepreneurs? There's certainly representatives from business. There's one or two characters who are Chinese local government officials. So maybe the people reading the books will see themselves in these characters doing good or bad. It would be interesting to think about that. I've got one more question about Guiyu. So I'm a little bit of a Google Maps addict. If I want to learn a little bit about something, I'll put its name in and search for it. So I zoomed in on Guangdong province and I zoomed in on Guiyu and I found it. And I found, although it's near the coast, it's a little bit different from your waste isle in the book because it's not an island. But I noticed there's an island not so far away from Shantou that's connected to the land by a fairly new bridge, just like the waste island, called, sorry if I say this wrong, Nan'ao, is that right?
Yes, Nan'ao.
Did you take any inspiration from Nan'ao, or is that just a coincidence?
Yes, because it's very close to my hometown. So, and I visit there as a tourist a lot. I think the geographic there is very convenient and very good for me to build up the world, and especially the bridge, and you can build up all this kind of action scenes in between. So yeah, I just followed the geography of Nan'ao, and also combined with the characteristic of Guiyu, so combine them together. So I think it's the advantage of like a writer,
Yeah.
especially a speculative writer. Yeah.
Because I think at first when I was looking, I knew Shantou was your hometown, so I saw this island next to Shantou, so I thought, oh yes, I've found Guiyu, and then actually no, you've used your creative license.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes.
I'm very satisfied that I've solved that question.
Yeah.
So I've just got a couple of final questions for you now.
Yeah.
First one is two-part question. Part one, what are you reading right now? And part two, are there any books, Chinese or not Chinese, that you'd like to recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, what I'm writing, what I'm reading right now actually is a couple books. Actually, I'm reading a lot of books like parallelly, because maybe it are relevant to my writing right now. So, and maybe some just randomly check. There's one I'm reading is the name is The Formula. Actually, it's from Barbasi. So it's a network scientist. So he studied in different industries about how those people succeed, and there's any particular abilities or like connections behind their reason, their factors of succeed. So I think it's very interesting and inspiring. And some other books I'm studying is like some Buddhism theory. Yeah, so yeah, it's actually a very marginalized stream in Buddhism. Actually, as it's about like studying how to categorizing your consciousness, and the process of like cognition in Buddhism. So actually, there's a lot of very specific, very detailed phrase in perceiving the world and how to shaping your consciousness in Buddhism theory. So I think it's also very inspiring to science fiction as well.
Right.
And also there's some I'll say graphic novels. One is from the Handmaid's Tale, the graphic novel edition for Renee Nant, I think her name is. She's a Canadian illustrator, so she adapted this graphic novel from Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. So I think it's very worthy to check it out.
Cool. That does sound interesting. I didn't know there was a graphic novel of that.
Yes. I think just coming out this year.
All right. Fun. Very last question. Is there any more of your own work or projects or platforms where we can follow you online that you'd like to promote or let us know about?
Actually, I just finished a graphic novel adaptation from one of my short story, Coming of the Light, which was collected in The Broken Star, also an anthology translated and edited by Ken. So I worked with an Italian illustrator, Jacopo Sigarini. So we're working together to adapt it from a short story into a graphic novel. So it's a pretty short, but I think it's very interesting because we try to connect the technology with Buddhism in modern China. So yeah, it's a very, I'll say it's a very comic and very tricky story, I'll say. Yeah.
That's one I've not read. I've got Broken Stars on my bookshelf, but I've only read the essays at the well, the intro at the start and the essays at the end for my dissertation, but
Yeah.
the only story in there I've been exposed to, I think, is at Leeds when you read a history of future illnesses. But yeah, that's really exciting to hear. Do you know where listeners will be able to read that one, where it's going to be published?
Yeah, we are right now we're connecting to some European publisher as well as some Chinese publishers. So see, because graphic novel is a very specific market there, so we need to find a very proper publisher. And also, I'm working with Kai-Fu Lee, the author of AI Superpower. So we're co-authoring a new book about like it's in between technology article, nonfiction, and science fiction, because we try to settle down this kind of imaginary narratives into a very solid scenario based on the very recent research and industry development. So to build up a world building on AI. So it's very near future, very technology driven, but also there's a lot of like ethical conflicts between the human and the machine. So I think it would be very interesting.
That sounds amazing. Is that one lined up for publishing anywhere, or are you going to have to find somewhere for that too?
Actually, we are discussing with some very big companies, very big publisher all around the world. So it will be a worldwide publish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can keep our eyes peeled for that one.
Yeah.
Do you have a Twitter as well, right?
Yes, I have a Twitter at Chen Qiufan. Yeah.
Yep, you're on there. If listeners want to connect or find out what you're up to. I've completely run out of questions, but I'd just like to say thank you for coming on the show. It's been a really good chat. Absolutely fantastic to have you.
Thank you so much, Angus. It's my pleasure too.
So one more thank you to Chen Qiufan there for having such a great chat with me and answering the questions so well. Welcome back anytime. I should say that although we've had lots of amazing experts on the show, this isn't necessarily an expert show. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm learning as I go. And I'm very open to having anybody on the show, provided you've read something that we can talk about, i.e. a piece of translated Chinese fiction, or, I'm open to non-fiction if it's sufficiently interesting. Absolutely. So just to go through the plugs again, Twitter, Angus Likes Words, Instagram, Trchfic, TRCHFIC. But most importantly, the thing you can do to help the show the most is tell your friends. So I think we said for Folding Beijing, tell someone who cleans up your rubbish, so we can't use that again. So let's go for tell your local mecha suit operator. Tell the boss of your family clan. Tell the economic hitman from your local American mega corporation. Tell all those people and tell your friends too. And until next time, 再见。遗忘的只能剩下